A poor student married a 71-year-old wealthy woman. 7 days later, he was shocked to realize his life had changed forever. A gray sky loomed over the small college town in Massachusetts, its streets slick with rain. Lucas Bennett trudged along the sidewalk, his backpack slung heavily over one shoulder, face etched with worry. At 24, he was struggling through his final year of law school, balancing a demanding part-time job, and crushed beneath debts left by his late father. Each passing day felt tighter, walls closing in around him. His phone buzzed suddenly, jolting him from anxious thoughts. "Lucas Bennett speaking," he answered wearily. A composed, authoritative voice replied, "Mr. Bennett, this is Victoria Sinclair. I'd like to meet with you. It's regarding your financial situation." Lucas frowned, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, who are you? How do you know about?" "I know enough," she interrupted smoothly. "Meet me at Sinclair Cafe, 7 p.m. sharp. It's important." The call ended before Lucas could protest, leaving him confused yet oddly hopeful. Lucas arrived at Sinclair Cafe just before 7, rain dripping off his jacket. Inside, the warmth embraced him, a stark contrast to the damp chill outside. He hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room until his eyes settled on an elegant woman seated in the corner. Victoria Sinclair was unmistakable, her silver hair styled impeccably, a string of pearls gleaming around her neck, radiating an aura of refined authority. She met his gaze and gestured gracefully for him to join her. He approached slowly, nerves fluttering in his chest as he took the seat opposite her. "Mrs. Sinclair?" Lucas began hesitantly, his voice barely concealing his confusion. "What's this about?" Victoria sipped her tea, her eyes sharp yet surprisingly calm. "Straight to the point. Good. I appreciate that." She set her cup down gently, leaning in slightly. "Lucas, I know about your debts, the ones your father left behind, your mother's medical expenses and your sister's tuition. I understand you're barely managing." Lucas swallowed hard, discomfort twisting in his gut. "How do you know so much about me?" She smiled faintly, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "I make it my business to know these things. I have an offer solution, if you will." He shifted uncomfortably. "What kind of solution?" Her gaze intensified, piercing through him. "Marry me?" The words hung heavily in the air, almost surreal. Lucas stared, certain he'd misunderstood. "Excuse me?" "You heard correctly," she responded evenly. "This isn't about romance, Lucas. It's a business arrangement. I'll clear all your debts, ensure your financial security, and in return, you'll be my husband." Lucas let out a nervous laugh, incredulity coloring his voice. "You can't be serious." "Why me? You don't even know me." Victoria leaned back, observing him with a cool, calculated expression. "Exactly. You're young, unattached, and frankly desperate enough to consider my offer. I don't need love. I require a companion, someone to share my name and solidify my legacy. It's purely contractual." Lucas shook his head, his mind racing. "This is insane. What's in it for you?" For a brief moment, Victoria's confident facade softened. "I've spent most of my life alone, Lucas. I have no children, no family left. Companionship even if only for appearances matters. Also, at my age, having a husband grants me more control over my affairs. Society still values certain formalities." He stared at her, overwhelmed by the absurdity of it all. Yet beneath that absurdity lay an unsettling logic. I can't decide right now," he stammered, his voice shaking. "I need time." "Of course," she replied calmly. "But don't take too long. Offers like this don't last forever." He left the cafe in a daze, the rain now pelting him relentlessly. That night, sitting at his mother's kitchen table, he struggled to find words as he shared Victoria's proposal. His mother's frail hands trembled, her expression torn between disbelief and cautious hope. "I know it sounds unthinkable," she finally whispered, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But if she's willing to help, maybe it's worth considering." Lucas felt a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. "You're asking me to marry a woman I don't love just to solve our problems?" "No," she said softly. "I'm asking you to save yourself and us from sinking deeper. Love is a luxury we can't afford right now." Her words haunted him through the night. By morning, his pride and desperation had waged a fierce battle inside him. He knew the answer, even if admitting it felt like a betrayal of every principle he'd ever held. Returning to the cafe the next morning, Lucas found Victoria already waiting, composed as ever. "Have you made your decision?" she asked without looking up from her tablet. Taking a deep breath, he steadied his voice. "I'll do it." A fleeting smile crossed her lips. "Good. I'll make the arrangements immediately." Within days, Lucas stood inside a small courthouse, wearing a tailored suit Victoria had provided. The ceremony was brief, witnessed only by Victoria's lawyer and a silent notary. As vows were exchanged, an unsettling sense of finality washed over him. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and Victoria turned to him, extending a hand. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Bennett," she murmured, her smile polite yet hollow. The reality of his decision hit hard as they exited the courthouse. Rain continued to fall, reflecting his troubled reflection in shallow puddles. Doubt gnawed at him. Had he just secured his family's future, or had he sacrificed his soul? Days later, Lucas moved into Victoria's sprawling estadia mansion, exuding grandeur yet coldly devoid of warmth. He felt more like a stranger than a husband. Their interactions were polite but distant, limited to formal dinners in which she maintained a composed, almost clinical demeanor. "I trust you're adjusting?" she asked one evening, slicing meticulously into her meal. "It's different," he admitted awkwardly. "This place is enormous. I feel like I'll get lost." She offered a faint smirk. "You'll adjust. Or perhaps you won't. Either way, you're here." Lucas sat alone in his dimly lit bedroom, staring blankly at the faded wallpaper as rain tapped gently against the window. His heart felt like lead in his chest, each beat heavier than the last. Victoria's outrageous proposal echoed relentlessly in his mind, mingling with his mother's desperate pleas and his own overwhelming sense of dread. Marriage to a woman nearly 50 years his senior just to escape financial ruin? The idea felt absurd, almost nightmarish, yet the gravity of his family's situation made dismissing it impossible. Each moment he hesitated, he saw the weight of responsibility pressing down on his mother's frail shoulders, the innocence slowly draining from his sister's eyes. He clenched his fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. Was he truly considering trading his freedom and dignity for security? But as he grappled with the impossible choice, another voice inside whispered harsh truths. Pride wouldn't feed his family or erase debts left behind by a father who had vanished, leaving ruin in his wake. The memories of his mother's tear-streaked face during countless nights spent poring over unpaid bills were vivid and painful. How could he live with himself knowing he had the power to end their suffering, yet had refused out of misplaced pride? The following morning, exhaustion etched deep into his face, Lucas dragged himself to the kitchen, where his mother sat quietly at the table. The dark circles under her eyes spoke volumes. Without saying a word, she looked at him, her eyes glistening with quiet desperation, silently pleading for a solution, any solution. He swallowed hard, the weight of his decision becoming unbearably clear. "Mom," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what to do." She reached for his hand, squeezing gently, her voice trembling with emotion. "Lucas, you've carried our burdens for so long. Maybe it's time to let someone else help, even if the price seems high. Maybe it's not just about you anymore, maybe it's about us too." His chest tightened, and he looked away, fighting back tears. "But at what cost, Mom? Marriage shouldn't be a business transaction. It's my life. I'd be selling myself." She leaned in, her frail yet steady presence grounding him. "You've already sacrificed so much. This isn't easy, and I wish more than anything you didn't have to consider it. But think of your sister's future, your dreams, the life you deserve. Pride is temporary, but the consequences of this decision will shape all our lives forever." Lucas knew she was right, yet resentment simmered beneath the surface. He didn't blame her. He blamed the cruel hand life had dealt them. After hours of pacing and agonizing over every potential outcome, he realized the truth. It wasn't about choice anymore. It was about survival. His dreams of freedom, love, and happiness seemed childish compared to the stark reality of debt and despair. The truth was painfully simply had to put aside his ideals to ensure his family's survival. Later that afternoon, Lucas found himself back at Sinclair Cafe, the rain outside relentless as if mirroring his inner turmoil. Victoria Sinclair sat waiting, poised and elegant, untouched by the world's chaos. As he approached, she set aside her newspaper, meeting his eyes with a mixture of expectation and curiosity. "Have you made your decision, Lucas?" she asked evenly, her voice betraying no emotion. He drew in a shaky breath, trying to steady his voice. "I'll do it," he managed to say, each word feeling like a stone lodged in his throat. Victoria's eyes softened just slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at her lips. "Good. You've made a practical choice." "I've made a necessary one," he corrected, bitterness tinging his words. She regarded him calmly, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "I understand this isn't easy for you, but rest assured, I have no illusions. This is strictly an arrangement. You'll have your freedom within limits, and I will have my companionship. It's simple." He stared at her, searching her face for any trace of humanity behind the cold exterior. "Why me, though? You could have chosen anyone." She looked away briefly, the first flicker of vulnerability he'd seen crossing her face. "Because you're honest, hardworking, and have integrity qualities money cannot buy. I'm old enough to know the difference between value and price." Her words caught him off guard, a crack forming in his defensive wall. "But you don't love me. And I certainly don't love you. How can this work?" Victoria leaned closer, her voice firm yet gentle. "Love isn't the foundation here. Respect is. Understanding is. I'm offering you a lifeline, and in return I ask for your loyalty. Over time, perhaps we'll find common ground. But if not, we both know where we stand." Lucas nodded slowly, absorbing her words. It was a business deal, and yet there was an odd sincerity behind it. "Then it's settled," he said finally, more to himself than to her. "I'll marry you." Victoria extended her hand across the table, waiting patiently. "Very well. Let's seal this partnership." As Lucas shook her hand, he felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow, knowing his life would never be the same. He had made a decision out of necessity, sacrificing part of himself for the greater good of those he loved most. It wasn't the future he'd imagined, but it was the one he'd chosen. In that moment, he silently vowed that even if he couldn't control the circumstances that had led him here, he would at least control how he faced them with dignity, strength, and unwavering resolve. Lucas stepped out of the sleek black limousine, his eyes wide with disbelief as Victoria Sinclair's sprawling estate unfolded before him. The mansion stood majestic yet cold, its towering marble columns and ivy-covered walls exuding an air of grandeur that felt more oppressive than inviting. He adjusted his grip on his single, worn suitcase. The stark contrast between his meager belongings and the opulence surrounding him only amplified his sense of alienation. Victoria stood at the top of the grand staircase, her posture impeccable, eyes sharp and assessing. She greeted him with a composed nod, her voice echoing through the expansive foyer. "Welcome to your new home, Lucas. I trust you'll find everything to your satisfaction." The formality in her tone sent a chill down his spine. There was no warmth, no reassurance, only a sterile acknowledgement of his new status. As he followed a silent maid up the grand staircase, Lucas felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. His room was lavish, far beyond anything he'd ever known. Intricately carved mahogany furniture, silk curtains that shimmered in the late afternoon sun, and a vast bed covered in luxurious linens. Yet, the extravagance did nothing to dispel the eerie emptiness that hung in the air. This place was a palace of solitude, beautiful but void of life. Dinner was served promptly at 7. Lucas took his place opposite Victoria at the expansive dining table, an ornate chandelier casting cold, glittering light over the exquisite porcelain dishes. Victoria ate methodically, her movements graceful yet mechanical. She spoke sparingly, her questions polite yet distant. "Are you finding everything to your liking?" she inquired coolly. "It's overwhelming," Lucas admitted cautiously. "This house feels so vast. I feel like an intruder." Victoria lifted her wine glass, studying him thoughtfully. "You'll grow accustomed to it. After all, it's yours now, too." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "It doesn't feel that way." Her eyes narrowed subtly. "It never does at first. Just remember, appearances matter. As my husband, your behavior reflects on me. Keep that in mind." The warning in her voice was subtle but unmistakable, leaving him even more unsettled. Days turned into weeks, but Lucas still felt like a ghost wandering through the mansion's halls. The staff moved silently, avoiding eye contact, whispering among themselves when they thought he wasn't listening. Occasionally, he overheard snippets of conversation that hinted at secrets lying beneath the pristine surface of his new life. "Does he even know?" a maid whispered. "She never does anything without a reason." "He'll figure it out eventually," another replied. "They always do." Lucas's curiosity grew with each passing day. The mansion itself seemed to harbor secrets, with locked rooms scattered throughout the vast corridors. Victoria never explained why certain doors remained sealed, but Lucas often caught her glancing furtively toward them, as if guarding something precious or dangerous. One evening, unable to shake the growing sense of unease, Lucas wandered the west wing, the dim lighting casting elongated shadows across ornate walls. His heart skipped a beat when he noticed one of the usually locked doors ajar. Without thinking, he approached quietly, pushing it open further. The room was dark, filled with antique furniture shrouded in dusty sheets. Yet one object caught his attention: a large portrait, its frame ornate and heavy. Lucas pulled back the sheet covering it, revealing the stern visage of a man whose piercing eyes seemed to bore into his soul. Beneath the painting, a brass plaque read, "Edward Sinclair." A chill ran through Lucas, Victoria's late husband. He was startled by a voice behind him. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Lucas." He spun around to find Victoria standing in the doorway, her face unreadable. I didn't mean to intrude," Lucas stammered. "I just wondered." "Wondered about what?" she interjected coldly, stepping closer. "About my past? About the man whose legacy you've inherited?" Lucas swallowed hard, sensing an edge of bitterness in her tone. "You never talk about him." Victoria's eyes softened slightly, though her voice remained distant. "Edward was powerful but flawed. His legacy is complicated. Some doors are best left unopened." "Why did you marry me, really?" Lucas asked abruptly, emboldened by the dimly lit room. "What am I here for?" Victoria studied him silently, her guard momentarily lowered. "You're here because I needed someone uncomplicated, unburdened by my past, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Yet, here you are, already challenging that." Lucas met her gaze steadily. "I can't live like a stranger in my own home, Victoria. I need to know what's going on." She sighed, turning away briefly before speaking. "Edward left behind more than wealth. He left behind debts, enemies, and secrets. I married you to stabilize things, to protect what remains of my family name. You were never supposed to uncover the truth, Lucas. This was meant to be simple." "What truth?" he demanded, his voice rising in frustration. Victoria hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "Edward made dangerous decisions, deals with dangerous people. They're still out there, waiting for an opportunity. Your presence here isn't just for companionship, it's for protection. A young husband by my side makes it harder for them to move against me." Lucas recoiled, realization dawning. "You used me as a shield?" Victoria didn't deny it. "I had no other choice. My life is a web of complications, Lucas. You're caught in it now, whether you like it or not." Anger flared within him, mixed with a painful sense of betrayal. "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" "I hoped you wouldn't have to," she replied quietly. "But perhaps I underestimated you." Lucas took a deep breath, the weight of his situation crashing down on him. "So what now? Do I just wait for these unknown threats?" Victoria's expression hardened again, her voice resolute. "You learn to survive. We both do. But mark my words, curiosity will only lead you deeper into darkness. Be careful what secrets you chase." She left him standing alone in the dark room, the portrait of Edward Sinclair looming ominously behind him. As Lucas stood in the silence, the truth settled heavily in his chest. His new life was not merely about wealth and convenience, it was entangled in a dangerous game of power, deceit, and hidden threats. His marriage wasn't just unconventional, it was a battle for survival, and Lucas realized with chilling clarity that he was now inextricably bound to the secrets of Victoria's mysterious past. Lucas paced the dimly lit library, his mind racing with unanswered questions and a growing sense of dread. Each day within Victoria's sprawling estate deepened his suspicion that he was trapped in a web of deception far darker than he'd imagined. Victoria had become increasingly distant, often disappearing behind closed doors, whispering furtively on hushed phone calls. The household staff remained tight-lipped, avoiding his gaze as if they feared what he might discover. Determined to find answers, Lucas had begun quietly observing Victoria's movements, sensing that the truth lay hidden somewhere within the labyrinth of rooms that Victoria carefully guarded. One stormy evening, Lucas found himself alone in Victoria's study, the room shrouded in shadow save for the soft glow of a solitary desk lamp. A chill crawled up his spine as he rifled through drawers, feeling a mixture of fear and guilt. His heart stopped as he pulled out an aged, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with time. Curiosity overpowering his hesitation, he opened it, eyes widening as he recognized Victoria's elegant handwriting. His breath hitched as he read the first entry, dated just weeks before their marriage. Lucas Bennett will serve his purpose. He's young, vulnerable, perfectly suited to my plan. Edward left me burdened with debts and enemies, who won't rest until they've taken everything. Lucas is my shield, my pawn in this game. I'll use him as Edward used me, until my position is secure. The cold, calculated words sent a wave of nausea through Lucas. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, each entry further revealing the extent of Victoria's deception. It wasn't companionship she sought, nor merely protection she intended to sacrifice him, if necessary, to save herself. Lucas's legs felt weak as he sank into Victoria's leather chair, the room spinning around him. Yet just as he closed the journal, a small, folded envelope slipped from its pages, landing softly on the plush carpet. He picked it up, recognizing Edward Sinclair's handwriting from earlier documents he'd seen. With trepidation, he opened it, unfolding the fragile paper carefully. His pulse quickened as he read, "Victoria, if you're reading this, it means I am gone and my sins have caught up with me. Know that my dealings were ruthless, built on betrayal and greed. My enemies are powerful, relentless, and they will not rest until my legacy is destroyed. I trust you to protect yourself, even if it means sacrifices must be made. Trust no one." The letter fell from Lucas's shaking hands. Edward Sinclair's legacy was one of treachery, deceit, and danger. Victoria hadn't just married him to protect herself. She'd married him to absorb the consequences of her late husband's crimes. Lucas was nothing more than a convenient sacrificia decoy to shield her from ruthless adversaries seeking revenge. The realization burned in his chest, betrayal searing through him like a blade. Suddenly, the study door creaked open, revealing Victoria, her expression cold, eyes narrowing dangerously as she took in the scene. Lucas stood abruptly, clutching the journal, anger replacing his shock. "Is it true?" he demanded, his voice shaking with fury and pain. "Was this your plan all along? To use me as a shield to sacrifice me if it came down to it?" Victoria's composed facade cracked momentarily, revealing a glimpse of remorse beneath her usual icy exterior. "Lucas, you don't understand," she began, her voice uncharacteristically fragile. "I had no other choice. Edward left me drowning in debt and targeted by dangerous men. I did what I had to do to survive." "You deceived me," Lucas spat, betrayal evident in his voice. "You made me believe this was an arrangement based on mutual benefit, but it was a trap from the start." Victoria stepped closer, her tone pleading yet firm. "I never wanted you hurt, but yes, I chose you because you were desperate, just like I was. Desperation makes people useful. Edward taught me that." Lucas shook his head, disgusted. "You're no better than him. You're willing to destroy innocent lives to protect your own." Her expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing instantly. "You don't know what it's like to live every day in fear, waiting for the past to claim you. Those meant they won't stop until they've taken everything Edward left behind. I needed a buffer, someone who wouldn't be missed. I chose survival. Wouldn't you?" Lucas's voice cracked with anger and sadness. "Survival at what cost? My life? My family's peace? You offered me hope, but you knew all along you were just feeding me lies." Victoria's eyes flashed with defiance. "This world isn't kind, Lucas. Edward's enemies wouldn't hesitate to destroy us both. I did what I had to do. Hate me if you must, but this is reality. We are both trapped in Edward's twisted legacy." Lucas's shoulders slumped, the weight of the truth crushing him. "You turned me into your scapegoat. How can you live with yourself?" Victoria's voice softened slightly, regret flickering across her face. "Guilt is a luxury I can't afford, but I won't pretend I don't feel it. I knew this day would come. Now you have a choice: leave and face those who will surely target you, or stay and face this together. Lucas stared at her, incredulous. You expect me to trust you now, after all of this? Victoria's gaze never wavered. Trust isn't necessary, only mutual survival. Edward's enemies are ruthless, Lucas. We either unite, or we both perish. Lucas's mind raced. He felt trapped, betrayed, yet painfully aware of the dangers lurking beyond the estate's gates. The truth was brutal, and undeniably had unwittingly become a pawn in a dangerous game of revenge and survival. As he stood there, the painful truth settled deeply into his soul. His marriage to Victoria had always been a lie, yet their fates were now bound together, entangled in the deadly aftermath of Edward Sinclair's legacy. The question now was whether Lucas would escape this twisted trap, or succumb to its inevitable destruction. Lucas knew that confronting Victoria wasn't enough. He needed to take action, to reclaim control over his life before it was too late. The mansion, once a symbol of luxury, now felt like a twisted maze, trapping him alongside the very woman who had deceived him. He couldn't sleep, haunted by Victoria's cold betrayal and the dark forces Edward Sinclair's past had unleashed upon them both. Determined, Lucas began secretly investigating Victoria's business dealings, carefully documenting suspicious financial transfers and hidden partnerships. It became clear that Victoria wasn't merely protecting herself. She was actively rebuilding Edward's corrupt empire, engaging in schemes that risked dragging him deeper into criminal entanglements. Each discovery fueled his anger, solidifying his resolve to break free from her grasp. One evening, as Lucas sifted through confidential files in Victoria's study, he stumbled upon a folder labeled with his own name. His blood ran cold. Inside, he found detailed plans outlining his accidental demise, a chilling scheme designed to deflect attention from Victoria onto him, making him the scapegoat for Edward's crimes. The files contained emails between Victoria and an anonymous contact, discussing methods to stage his death as a tragic accident, effectively eliminating any trace of suspicion against her. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of rage and terror coursing through him. Victoria had not only used him, she was planning to dispose of him entirely. This revelation erased any lingering hesitation. He had to confront her, to expose her treachery, and end this twisted game. The following night, Lucas waited in the shadows of the grand dining hall, the chandelier casting eerie light upon the polished floor. Victoria entered, her composed demeanor masking the darkness beneath. "I've been expecting you," she said calmly, pouring herself a glass of wine. "I assume you found the files?" Lucas stepped forward, his voice trembling with suppressed fury. "You planned to kill me, Victoria. After everything you've already done, you were willing to take my life to protect yourself?" She sipped her wine, unfazed. "Survival, Lucas. It's always been about survival. You're young, naive and able to grasp the lengths one must go to when cornered. Edward taught me that lesson well. Sacrifice is sometimes necessary." Lucas slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the dishes. "I refuse to be your sacrifice. You might think you control everything, but I won't let you manipulate me any longer. This ends now." Victoria laughed coldly, placing her glass down with calculated precision. "And what do you propose, Lucas? Going to the police? Exposing everything? Who would believe you over me? I've crafted this carefully. You are nothing more than a poor student who married for money. Your credibility is non-existent." Lucas took a deep breath, steadying himself. "You underestimate me. I've documented everything: your plans, your financial manipulations, the contacts you made to carry out my murder. It's all been safely sent to a trusted friend. If anything happens to me, the world will know the truth." For the first time, genuine fear flashed across Victoria's face, quickly replaced by rage. "You think you can threaten me? I built this empire from ashes. I've survived worse than you, Lucas Bennett. You're playing a dangerous game." Lucas stepped closer, his voice firm. "You're right. It is dangerous, but I'm no longer afraid of you. Your actions have consequences, and you will face them. I'm leaving this twisted prison, and you'll have no control over me anymore." Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously, her voice low and menacing. "If you leave, Edward's enemies will find you. They won't hesitate to destroy you. You're safer with me." Lucas shook his head defiantly. "I'd rather face them than spend another day under your control. You've manipulated, betrayed, and plotted my death. No more. Your empire is crumbling, Victoria, and I refuse to fall with you." Victoria lunged forward, grabbing Lucas's arm tightly, desperation cracking her composed facade. "You don't understand. Without you, they'll come for me. I won't survive." Lucas pulled away sharply, his voice cold. "Maybe you don't deserve to. You built this nightmare, Victoria. It's time you faced the consequences." As he turned to leave, Victoria's voice echoed behind him, raw with bitterness. "You'll regret this, Lucas. Revenge won't protect you. It only leads to destruction." Lucas paused at the doorway, turning slightly. "This isn't revenge, Victoria. It's justice. Something you and Edward never understood." With that, he walked out, leaving Victoria standing alone amidst the shattered remains of her carefully constructed lies. As he stepped out into the night, the cold air filled his lungs, feeling like freedom. Yet he knew the danger was far from over. Edward's enemies were real, and they wouldn't rest until their thirst for revenge was satisfied. But for the first time, Lucas felt hope. He had confronted the truth, taken a stand, and broken free from Victoria's poisonous grasp. Whatever came next, he would face it on his terms, no longer a pawn but a man reclaiming his life from those who sought to control it. Lucas paced the grand library late into the night, the dim light casting long shadows over ornate bookshelves. His mind raced, haunted by Victoria's chilling betrayal. The luxurious mansion now felt oppressive, a gilded cage he desperately needed to escape. Every creak in the floorboards heightened his anxiety. He knew now that his marriage had been a calculated trap, a cruel plot set in motion by Victoria to exact revenge for the sins of Edward's past. Determined to uncover the full extent of her treachery, Lucas spent days secretly combing through Victoria's study. One evening, as he sifted through stacks of old files, his fingers brushed against an envelope tucked deep in a drawer. His heart quickened when he saw his name scrawled across it in Victoria's distinctive handwriting. Inside, he discovered letters and documents detailing her dark intentions. Victoria had meticulously planned to frame him, using him as a scapegoat to divert suspicion away from herself and onto him for Edward's criminal activities. But what chilled Lucas most was a letter detailing her sinister final plan, his death disguised as an accident. The letter was addressed to an unknown accomplice, outlining a plot to stage Lucas's tragic drowning at the mansion's secluded lake. His hands trembled as he read her words. Lucas must never uncover the truth. His death will end this neatly, leaving no loose ends. Anger surged through him, burning away any remnants of fear. He'd been manipulated, deceived, and now marked for death by the woman he had trusted to save him. The realization lit a fire in Lucas. No longer would he be Victoria's pawn, helplessly caught in her web of vengeance. It was time to fight back. Summoning his courage, Lucas decided to confront Victoria directly, though he knew the risk. Late that night, he found her seated alone in the drawing room, calmly sipping tea as if nothing had changed. She looked up, unfazed by his presence. "Couldn't sleep, Lucas?" she asked coolly, her eyes glittering in the lamplight. Lucas tossed the envelope onto the table between them, scattering its damning contents. "I know everything, Victoria," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet fury. "You never intended this marriage to help me. It was always about revenge. You planned to destroy me, frame me, even kill me. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Victoria placed her teacup down slowly, her expression unreadable. "You've been snooping," she said calmly. "I expected you might, eventually. I warned you not to dig too deeply." Lucas glared at her, disgusted by her calm demeanor. "You manipulated me, used my desperation against me, all because of Edward's crimes. But I'm not my father. You can't punish me for his sins." Victoria's composure faltered slightly, a flash of anger passing across her eyes. "Your father destroyed lives, mine included. Edward took everything from me. You were my chance at justice. But you've left me no choice." Lucas stepped closer, his voice hardening. "Justice? This isn't justice, Victoria. It's revenge. You're no better than Edward. You're willing to hurt innocent people just to settle scores." She stood abruptly, her voice venomous. "Don't lecture me about innocence, Lucas. You married me for money, for your family's debts. You're not innocent either." Lucas didn't back down, meeting her gaze defiantly. "I married you believing it would save my family. But I never deceived you, never plotted against you. You betrayed my trust, and now you're planning to kill me. It ends here." Victoria laughed coldly. "And what exactly will you do, Lucas? Go to the police? Who will believe you?" You're a penniless student who married a wealthy older woman. Everyone will see you as the fortune hunter who tried to swindle an old widow. Lucas smiled bitterly. You underestimate me. I've documented everything: your letters, emails, financial transactions. I've sent copies to someone I trust. If anything happens to me, it all goes public. You won't escape this time. Victoria's eyes widened in shock before narrowing dangerously. You fool. You've signed your death warrant. Edward's enemies will find you, even if I don't. Lucas stood firm, refusing to show fear. Let them come. I'm done living under your shadow. If revenge consumes you, that's your choice. But I won't let it consume me. She stared at him, the reality sinking in. Victoria's hands trembled slightly, revealing her fear beneath the composed facade. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed. Lucas turned to leave, pausing at the door. I know exactly what I've done. I've chosen to fight back, to reclaim my life. If you want to destroy yourself, I won't stop you, but I refuse to be dragged down with you. As he walked away, Lucas felt a strange sense of liberation. The truth was finally out, and he was no longer Victoria's pawn. Whatever the future held, he would face it on his own terms, free from her poisonous grasp. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous even, but Lucas knew one thing for certain: would never again be a victim of someone else's vengeance. In the days following the explosive confrontation, the once imposing mansion felt hollow and empty. Lucas remained at the estate, but an eerie silence hung heavily over every room. Victoria confined herself mostly to her quarters, and whenever their paths crossed, she seemed distant, her icy composure now replaced by quiet resignation. Lucas grappled with conflicted emotions. Anger still simmered, yet it mingled with something unexpected: pity. The woman who had orchestrated his ruin now appeared diminished, broken by her own web of vengeance. One morning, as Lucas wandered the gardens, trying to clear his mind, he stumbled upon an old gardener tending to wilted roses. The elderly man glanced up, offering Lucas a faint smile. Sad, isn't it? The gardener remarked, gesturing to the dying flowers. These roses were once her pride and joy. Lucas hesitated, feeling a strange kinship with the fading blooms. Did you know her well? He asked softly. The gardener sighed, nodding thoughtfully. I've been here for decades. I've watched Mrs. Sinclair change over the years. She wasn't always like this, bitter and consumed by revenge. Life made her that way. Lucas's curiosity deepened. What do you mean? The gardener stood up, brushing dirt from his weathered hands. She and Mr. Sinclair once had a son, Daniel. Bright young man, full of life. But when your father's fraud bankrupted them, Daniel tried desperately to save the family. He worked himself into the ground, fell ill, and died young. That tragedy broke something inside Mrs. Sinclair. She blamed your father, and bitterness took hold of her heart. Lucas felt a pang of sorrow. He hadn't known about Daniel. The revelation painted Victoria's anger in a painfully human light. Her actions were wrong, yet he began to understand the depths of her grief. She lost everything she truly loved, the gardener continued. Revenge became her lifeline, but it never brought her peace. I see her now a shell of who she once was. Lucas spent hours pondering the gardener's words, realizing that revenge hadn't just poisoned Victoria, it had trapped him too. He had sought justice, but beneath his anger, he discovered empathy. Victoria was a victim of circumstances, twisted by years of unresolved pain. That evening, Lucas found himself standing outside Victoria's door. Taking a deep breath, he knocked gently. When she answered, her face was pale and tired, eyes rimmed red from tears she'd tried to hide. Lucas, she said quietly, not meeting his gaze, what do you want? To talk, Lucas replied gently. Can I come in? She hesitated before stepping aside. They sat in awkward silence for a moment until Lucas finally spoke. I learned about Daniel today, he began softly. Victoria's breath hitched, her hands trembling. He was my entire world, she admitted, her voice raw with pain. When your father destroyed us, Daniel sacrificed everything to help. His death, it broke me. I wanted someone to pay. Lucas met her eyes, seeing genuine sorrow. I understand your pain, Victoria. I can't condone what you did to me, but I do understand. Tears welled in her eyes. I became what I hate: someone driven by vengeance, blinded by bitterness. I hurt you, an innocent man, just to ease my suffering. Lucas reached across, gently taking her shaking hand. It's not too late to change. Revenge only destroys. I don't want to be trapped by bitterness. Maybe you don't either. Victoria squeezed his hand weakly. I'm sorry, Lucas, truly sorry. I was wrong, and you didn't deserve any of this. Lucas felt a weight lifting, surprised by the relief forgiveness brought. I forgive you, he whispered. Not because what you did was right, but because carrying hatred will only imprison us both. Victoria broke down, sobbing quietly. In that moment, years of anguish flowed out of her, cleansing a soul long imprisoned by anger. Lucas stayed with her, offering quiet comfort, understanding for the first time that forgiveness was not weakness, but strength. In choosing forgiveness over revenge, he reclaimed control of his own life, no longer chained to the past. Both had found peace in an unexpected place, not through vengeance, but through understanding, compassion, and the healing power of letting go. The story of Lucas and Victoria teaches a powerful life lesson. Revenge only perpetuates pain, while forgiveness has the strength to heal deep wounds. Victoria's relentless pursuit of vengeance trapped her in bitterness, causing her to hurt innocent people, including Lucas, who suffered for crimes he didn't commit. Lucas, however, chose a different path: compassion and understanding. By forgiving Victoria, he freed himself from the toxic cycle of resentment, illustrating that true strength lies not in retaliation, but in letting go. In 2025, this lesson remains profoundly relevant. We often face situations where anger or bitterness might seem justified, yet holding on to resentment only prolongs our suffering. Instead, choosing empathy and forgiveness, Evan, toward those who wrong you allows personal growth and inner peace. Lucas's story inspires us to break destructive patterns, reminding us that forgiveness doesn't excuse wrongdoing. It empowers us to reclaim our happiness and build a brighter future.